Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to today's broadcast. This is Salena, and I want to thank you all for joining us today for Troubleshooting Tuesdays. We are doing this series where we're doing Motivational Mondays, Stress-Free Sundays, Motivational Mondays, Troubleshooting Tuesdays, which is today, Wellness Wednesdays, Thankful Thursdays, and Fun Fridays. And today is a very special day because we have with us Dr. Tara Scott. She is an OBGYN in Akron, Ohio with Revitalize Medicine Group or Medical Group. And I want to welcome her here. She has been doing an OBGYN for like over 20 years and doing integrative and functional medicine for like a decade. Her specialty is mostly hormones and health, and she does a lot with genetics. And thank you for joining us, Tara.
Well, thank you so much for hosting.
So today's topic is methylation, MTHFR, hormones, and chronic health, like how those things all interplay with one another, because we have a lot of us here are dealing with either our children or ourselves with different health issues. And we hear all the time now MTHFR is coming to the scenes. So we're going to talk about what is MTHFR, and then also some other genetics that we want to look into. And then how these things, MTHFR, these other genetic SNPs, play a role in our hormones, in our GI tract, in our neurotransmitters. And then also, what is it that we can do if we find that, hey, we've got MTHFR, what is it that we can do about it? And how can you find out if you have MTHFR? Maybe you're like, you know what, I'm wondering, I've got a lot of these symptoms. How do I know if I have this? So we're going to cover all of those things and then a lot of other little tidbits. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start first with what's genetics? Like, what are our genes? Can you give us a few little tips or tidbits on how, to understand a little bit more about what is genetics, Tara?
Right. So we weren't even able to code the human DNA till 2003. So a lot of this is all new medicine. And so some of it, we have a lot of research behind, some of it we don't. So I always start when I'm talking to patients with what I call genetics 101. So first of all, you have, if you think of a gene that's coding something like brown hair, brown eyes, that's something that has a gene. And on that gene, there's many little locations, kind of like a street and many houses on a street. And so there's a genetic language that's made up of nucleotides, which are C, T, G. And so there's 4 letters that make up this whole code, kind of like a Morse code. So your genetics, your RNA and your DNA is double-stranded, kind of like a little ladder, and they each have these little nucleotides that join together and make the little rung of the ladder. So if you think about a ladder and you had one little thing that was missing, you could still pretty much climb up that ladder. So we're not talking about a whole gene or a whole chromosome. Like Down syndrome is a whole chromosome that's abnormal, and a whole gene is a large. We're talking about one little nucleotide. So that's what SNP is, single nucleotide pleomorphism or polymorphism. And so that's one little letter is different. So I like to say that there's parts of the genes that are important and the parts that aren't. So there's coding region, there's exons, introns, so there's part of it that actually is a consequence if there's a mistake there, and there's some that isn't. So for example, say you're coming to see me and my name is Joy, okay? And somebody sends you a letter saying that you're gonna go see Dr. J. Scott, J-A-Y. And I walk in, and you're like, well, where's the doctor? Because you're expecting a man. You're just expecting Dr. J. Scott. Well, I'm Dr. Joy Scott, J-O-Y. So just transposing one letter totally changed the meaning, but I'm still a human. I'm still a doctor, and I can still help you. So it's a little bit different. The function is going to be a little bit different, but it still works. So there's some genetic SNPs that are like that. And then if I said, hey, are you two coming? Or are you two coming? Or are you coming too? There's T-O-O and T-W-O. That kind of SNP has no significance really, because you can still hear and understand what I'm saying. It doesn't matter if it's TOO or TWO. So there's some SNPs that have no significance at all, that there's no data behind. And then there's something like if I said, are you gonna go take the cat out? And it was C-A-T and you change it to C-U-T, take the cut out, that doesn't make any sense at all. So those are more significant and of the consequence. So the problem is with everybody having direct-to-consumer genetic testing, they can start looking at the printout of their genetic SNPs, and not all of them are significant. And I think we'll talk at the end too, that even when you have a significant one, it doesn't really translate to disease because it's just your genetic code. So basically, we have more and more data now the last 15 years about which ones are important and which ones aren't.
So where does the MTHFR, like the MTHFR SNPs, are those a cat, joy? Like what about those SNPs?
So the MTHFR is actually a very long region. If anyone who's done their 23andMe, you see there'll be like 12 listed. So we really only have data for 2 alleles or house, like think of the house on the street. We know about 677 and we know about 1298. So those are more knowing you have one SNP. So for example, 677, you know that if you get one from your mom, one from your dad. And so we say if you have one abnormal, that's heterozygote. And if you get 2 abnormal, that's homozygote. And for some reason, they call the normal wild type. Wild sounds to me abnormal, but they've decided to call the normal wild type. So basically, if you have an MTHFR and you're heterozygote, then that means that since it's an enzyme, so it's coding not for a protein like eye color, it's coding for an enzyme, which is like a highway. I like to describe it as a highway. So an enzyme gets a protein from one thing to another. So that enzyme, instead of having 4 lanes, is down to 2 lanes. So it decreases the enzyme activity of MTHFR. So there's 677 and there's 1298. So we generally test for all 4 of those alleles. And so the thought is the more abnormal you have, the less fast or the more of a slowdown that the enzyme works. So I actually have 3 out of 4 abnormal, which is pretty uncommon to be a triple MTHFR. So there's homozygote, heterozygote, there's compound heterozygote that you have 1 abnormal at 677 and 1 at 1298. So that all translates, we think, as far as the data shows, to a slower MTHFR enzyme. But the thing about the MTHFR is it's only one of a very complicated biochemical pathway. And I think when I started doing this and found out that I had MTHFR after I had miscarriage and infertility, we started honing in on just that. But there's so many other enzymes that are involved in that process that we can't really say that there is a significant for that one SNP. You have to kind of know the other things that are involved, like COMT, MTRR, MTR, BHMT. They're all involved in that biochemical pathway of taking folate from the environment, turning into methylfolate, and there's little cogwheels that it's involved in proteins, it's involved in DNA replication, it's involved in cell wall synthesis. So they're all upstream or downstream equations of a bigger, wider thing. So think of a rainforest. It's just one kind of part of the ecosystem.
So you mentioned the folate and transporting the folate. Methylation. Can you give us a little bit more about methylation and how the MTHFR fits into methylation?
So methylation is part of a cycle. So basically it's a biochemical term. So methyl group is a carbon and 3 hydrogen groups. So basically all that means is you have a compound and methylation is adding that CH3 group onto that compound. So when we think of methylation, it's some of the processes in our body that turns on and off genes. It's also involved in making your neurotransmitters. And because it's picking back right up against the tetrahydrobiopterin cycle, which was your serotonin and your dopamine, and it's also up against your methyl and your folate cycle. So the MTHFR is involved with taking folate and turning it into methylated folate so that can spin it, and then it also makes homocysteine. Homocysteine also makes something called glutathione, which is very important. I call glutathione like your Hoover vacuum cleaner. It's your detoxification. And that's also the pathway that gets rid of your sulfites. So some people might say that they're not able to do food with sulfates or wines or things like that. So there's it's actually like circle biochemical pathway. So MTHFR is just a little point of it, but we've noted, at least in OBGYN, that having an MTHFR mutation can put you at risk for miscarriage, can put you at risk for not getting rid of your estrogen properly, and also can have a direct consequence to depression. And I've also seen anxiety. So I always don't test MTHFR in isolation, but also with other enzymes like COMT, which is involved in estrogen metabolism as well.
So basically, the methylation is going to start off, these processes, these highways, and then you've got these other side streets that it's going to. So if we have the MTHFR, then we're down. So this 4-lane highway, we've got this 2-lane highway, but we're still trying to get the same amount of traffic through, right? And so
Absolutely.
what happens if we have, let's say we have one of the heterozygous SNPs, how much is that going to decrease versus if we have the homozygous?
So if you think about it, like I would say, if you have a 4-lane highway, and this is just my simplified way of explaining it, is that a 4-lane highway, if you have heterozygote, maybe you've got 3 lanes out of the 4. If you're homozygote, you got 2 lanes out of the 4. And if you have, 3 out of the 4 like I do, that'd be like 1 lane. But think about this, Salena. Think about traffic, okay? The highway and the speed you can go on the highway has other factors. What time of day it is. So if you're trying to drive at 8 a.m., or 1 p.m., there's a huge difference. Or if you're trying to drive at 5 p.m., right? If you're trying to drive when it's snowing 5 inches versus if you're driving in the summer. So there are extrinsic things that affect how fast you can go. So that's where epigenetics comes into it. We can't get stuck on the heterozygote, homozygote. It's important to know what your genetic pathways are because we can overcome this. And how when there's construction, there's always a detour. And so the body's an amazing thing that a lot of times there's a detour, or maybe there's a way that you want to facilitate that traffic will move a little bit better.
So what are the other key things that we can do to facilitate helping like these extra, those detour pathways? Because we don't want to just treat a SNP just because we have like the MTHFR doesn't mean I need to run out and get a supplement. So what are some ways we can say, okay, we've got some obstacles here, we've got a construction zone, but we still need to optimize the travel here. What are some things that we need to look at in our environment or in our life, to give us some opportunities to, support those pathways?
So you brought up an excellent point, Salena, about not just running out and treating a SNP. And I made that mistake a lot with myself and with a lot of patients. I thought, oh, you have this SNP, you need this. You have this, you need this. You need this supplement, and then didn't address all the other things that you mentioned. So I just want to say Dr. Ben Lynch's book, The Dirty Genes, just came out about 4 or 5 months ago. It's a great read for people. They talk about 7 of the most common SNPs. And would you believe that I have SNPs in all of them? But they talk about MTHFR and COMT, which we've been talking about today. And he says exactly that. He doesn't tell you to go find out if you have it. He gives you a questionnaire to say, how can you suggest that you have a slow? It's like kind of like a questionnaire. So basically what you mentioned on is, if you have MTHFR, you may not be able to handle folic acid. And part of the reason why, when we were in OB, we started testing people for MTHFR. And then we started giving them synthetic folic acid at very high doses. And what we saw is that, that doesn't really improve outcomes. There's no improvement in preterm delivery or miscarriage. So MTHFR must not have anything to do with blood clotting or miscarriage. Let's not even test for it anymore. That was the conclusion. But what they didn't realize is by giving folic acid, it's synthetic. And if you have MTHFR, you cannot turn folic acid into 5-methyl MTHF, and you can't use it. So this high-dose synthetic folic acid is competing with your enzymes and actually makes it even worse. So that's why there was no improvement in outcome, because you can't get it. It's just like if you had a diabetic and their blood sugar was really low, are you going to give them Splenda? I mean, Splenda is not going to raise their blood sugar. So these synthetic things that we have in our environment are not going to do it. So some people who have a SNP and MTHFR need to have more folic acid in their diet. And I say folic acid, but what I really mean is folate. And so there are food sources of folate. So what happened is I totally changed my diet. I would make sure I was eating spinach every day and raw foods, and you've got cruciferous vegetables. And so somebody who's eating a standard American diet, the SAD diet of cereal for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, and steak and potatoes, isn't getting their green leafy vegetables, so they're not getting folate. And if you're eating a lot of processed food, it's got added folic acid in it. So now you're getting this high. If you're having a cereal, it's all fortified with folic acid in it. So now you're having so much folic acid in it, and you're not able to turn it into what you need.
So sometimes it's not just, adding what we need, but we've got to remove then some of the road barriers. So if we've got something that's synthetic that's stopping up these pathways, or, lifestyle, changes that are blocking these things that are hindering us, we need to sometimes remove those things and then in addition add others. So it's not just we're going to add a supplement, we're going to add this, but we got to find also obstacles that are blocking our way. Is that right?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest changes and the first changes we should be doing is our diet.
Exactly. So, what are some other SNPs? We had talked about the MTHFR. So, I want to get into just a little bit more on some of these other SNPs and what it means, like methylation wise. Like in our children, what are some ways that this can express itself that is a warning to us that, you know what, we maybe need to be looking at our diet, or is there something that we need to remove? You know, there's things that are just kind of out of balance.
Okay, well, a couple of the SNPs that I really see a lot in my practice, besides for MTHFR, are COMT and MAOA and MAOB. Okay, so one of the things that is kind of my pet peeves is children who are prescribed antidepressants. I see a lot of teens. I mean, since OBGYN, I don't see children, but I see a lot of girls, teen girls that are, suicidal, depressed, whatever, and it starts at the time of puberty. Okay, and so they're kind of anxious growing up as a kid, and then all of a sudden puberty comes, and they're really going off the deep end. Well, this is why that happens. COMT is the second step of estrogen detoxification. So you have estrogen floating around, it has to be turned into another compound by a couple of enzymes, and then the last enzyme, so it's floating around, it's made more polar, so it goes from the sticky blood to the urine out of your body. Well, that last step is the COMT enzyme. So if your COMT is slow, you're going to be slow to get rid of estrogen. Well, think about it. That COMT highway, which is supposed to be 4 lanes, also shares with it your neurotransmitter dopamine and norepinephrine. So dopamine is your neurotransmitter that makes you motivated and get things done, and norepinephrine is your energy and alertness, okay? So think about a kid that has a slow COMT. They're kind of anxious all the time. In COMT, there's not much estrogen around, right? So this slow 2-lane highway is doing okay with these neurotransmitters. And then bam, you got estrogen. So this 2-lane highway that's supposed to be 4 lanes has estrogen coming in and dopamine and norepinephrine. You talk about a traffic backup. And these poor kids are so anxious and they go off the deep end. And so learning what the cause is of this instead of treating the symptoms. So what do they get put on? So they're so anxious, so they get put on an SSRI, which helps to boost serotonin, supposedly. Well, it doesn't really replenish serotonin. It just prevents the reuptake of it. So serotonin, what I see is a lot of people have a fast MAO, and that's the enzyme that gets rid of serotonin. So you're supposed to have dopamine and serotonin on a teeter-totter. If dopamine goes up, serotonin goes down. And if they have a fast MAO, then they're getting rid of serotonin even quicker. I also see kids who have ADHD. They usually have a fast COMT. So you don't want to get rid of everything fast. I mean, even with estrogen, if you get rid of it too quickly, you're going to have lower levels. So if you have a fast COMT, then you're getting rid of your dopamine and your norepinephrine too fast. And these kids then have low motivation and they're diagnosed with ADHD. So I like to do a lot of testing, especially in these teen girls, when they're starting to have these problems, and maybe prevent them getting put on medicine.
So that's one of the signs we have a lot of like kids with ADHD is kind of one of those things that's been on the rise, and anxiety, depression, all of these different neurological imbalances. So one of the things that we should be looking at then, what you're saying is that we need to be looking at that, okay, what's upstream from that? What are the things that our body naturally is going to do to provoke, the anxiety or depression, and then what pathways are involved in that, and where should we be looking to support those pathways, whether it's nutritionally or with our lifestyle, and look at our genetic SNPs and other things to see, hey, that's really the problem versus let's give a medication that's going to block off these pathways, and now traffic is going to be backed up somewhere else. Am I getting that right?
Right. So I think, that's true. Looking at the cause is really important. And as we mentioned before, diet, if you've got a kid that's eating junk food and he's eating sugar all the time, and they're not getting vegetables, all of those neurotransmitters have building blocks that they need to build to make their neurotransmitters. So if you're not eating protein, it's hard to make your dopamine. If you're not eating carbs, it's hard to make your serotonin. So they all have building blocks that they need. And that's kind of why people have cravings, because if they're deficient in those building blocks, sometimes they have cravings for sugar or something like that. So that's one of the problems, I think. And where I work, there's a holistic nurse practitioner who works specifically with kids with ADHD. And the first thing she does is talk to them about their diet. And most of those kids are eating too much sugar or dyes or artificial things. So you're right, those are the first thing. Now, there are some people, if you look at the data about using meds for ADHD or specifically anxiety and depression, The psychiatry world seems to think that it really comes from adverse childhood events. And so, but I have patients in my practice that do not have any adverse childhood events. They have happy childhood and they all of a sudden have this issue. So I share the belief that the medicines are treating a symptom and not a cause. And there may be times where you have to use the medicine if someone's really suicidal or that's really in danger to their life, and other things might not work fast enough. I'm not saying anything about that. I'm just saying for the most people that I see, they're generally healthy and they're generally trying to be preventative. So they're not in that state yet. They're getting down that road. And that's when we back up. The other thing that I see is cortisol affects methylation. So cortisol slows that all down. So you could have a great diet and you could have, taking the supplements, but if you still have stress, it's going to slow all that down. That's one of the things that happened to me. I cleaned up my diet. I took my supplements. I can't unless I sell my kids on the black market, I'm not going to be able to get rid of my stress, right? So until you really cut back and work on your cortisol, so that's the next piece of this, is stress management, which I think you touched on too, is very important in treating your genetic SNPs.
Yeah, stress is usually one of the big things that I usually say it's non-negotiable, because if we aren't addressing the stress, then we've got to stop the body, because the stress is going to put us in that sympathetic fight or flight mode. And that's not a healing mode. We've got to be in that parasympathetic, peaceful, restful, digest, rejuvenate mode. And so, like you said, we can be eating the right foods, going to sleep, or, the right activity, the right supplements or whatever, but then we're not getting anywhere because we have this huge, heavy burden of stress. And I see that a lot with clients, like, look, we've been trying this protocol and that protocol, and, look at the foods, I'm eating the best foods. Well, putting that great fuel in, our body needs to be able to utilize it. And if we have the stress, it's going to divert processes away from our GI tract where it can't use that great fuel. And so I stress that, like, everywhere I go, I'm always like hammering home, we have to be addressing the stress, or else most of the other things a lot of times can be in vain, especially whenever we have the really chronic health situations going on.
100%. That's probably true for most of what we do in functional medicine, right? But especially for your neurotransmitters and for your methylation, stress is one of the things. Diet and stress is really, and sleep is really important too, but that kind of goes along with the stress management as well. So, I mean, when I started delving into this, I loaded myself up with B vitamins. I need all these supplements. I changed my diet. I totally overhauled my lunch. I was eating this raw food for lunch. So I totally overhauled what I was eating. And then I got to a situation that I was over-methylating. All of a sudden, I started having hives. Like I would take the B vitamin and I would get hives, and I was not a hive person. Or I'd start getting nauseated, or I'd hear people were having aches, leg aches, or they're having more anxiety. So I actually had to stop taking my B vitamins because I didn't need them, because I had totally overhauled my diet and I was working on things. So that's why it is important to work with a practitioner like you that's working with this. And a lot of people, you can Google WebMD or whatever, and I have this SNP, I've got the direct-to-consumer thing, I need this, I'm just going to take this. But it's really important to look at the whole balance and work with a practitioner who knows how to weed through these things, because obviously even myself, I was overtreated myself and I had a problem with overmethylation. I've had a couple patients that have had that as well.
Yeah, that's another thing that I really usually stress a lot is we've got to learn, and I like how Dr. Lynch talks about the book you mentioned, The Dirty Genes, is another one of my favorite books, because he talks about that pulse method. And I never put a name to it. I mean, that's basically what I've always taught and what I do. And I never had a name, but I love that name, the pulse, because we have to really listen to our body and realize that the supplements are to support, a really good foundation. It's not a replacement, and it's not something you're going to be on now for life. We've got to use it to say, hey, this is whenever I need it. Sometimes we need to push on the gas pedal because we got to pass another car. We don't keep our foot, on the gas pedal with it floored all the time, or it's going to cause some problems. And so we need to do this thing whenever we're looking at, when we do decide we do need a supplement, to make sure we are using it for a very specific purpose and for a very specific amount of time, and to listen to our body. And what it's telling us is, okay, hey, we got ourselves out of the groove. We got around the car. We don't need to keep, going 100 mile an hour down the road here. And so that's another great point. And I usually try to, emphasize that a lot with my clients, and usually any of my talks about that, because it's so important that we don't just first, go get a supplement because we have a SNP or because we have a diagnosis. And then second, that the supplements, when we're going to use them, is for a very specific amount of time and for a very specific purpose.
I do think that's a really great point. I just want to add, though, that there are some supplements for maybe not for SNPs, but other processes that are probably more important to take every day. For example, if you have a vitamin D SNP, that means your body is not able to use the receptor, has a kind of an alteration that you're just not able to use vitamin D. So if you didn't take that, if you stopped taking that, you would still require a higher need for that. And since the way to get vitamin D is sun, where I live, there's not a lot of sun. So that's probably something that someone where I live has to probably take most days. So the pulse method, I think, is mostly referencing the Bs, the B vitamins and the methylation support. And I know some of the other things like choline, like if you have a methylation problem, I take choline, phosphatidylcholine, which helps make your neurotransmitter acetylcholine and helps make the cell walls. And so there's a lot of supplements I'll take most days. And then some days, like you said, I'll decide, okay, do I really need to take this now? How's my energy? But I think that's a great point, though, being intentional about it.
Yes, and listening to our body, we're making sure that we're listening to, okay, hey, how is our body feeling? And knowing when we need more and when we need to continue and those sorts of things. Because it often gets overlooked so often, even in the naturopathic functional world. Sometimes, they're just like, okay, you've got this, so we're just going to give you these supplements and that's it. And without really looking into, okay, how is my body responding? When, what is it really needing? All this stuff to get it back in balance. So what are some things that we can do, or how do we find out, if we have, let's first talk about more a little bit about what are some other things we can do besides, okay, eating foods, like what kind of foods should we be eating? How important is it, to eat real foods? Can we, packaged foods, let's get a little bit more into what are the main core things that we need to do if we have any of these, genetic SNPs, whether it's MTHFR or the COMT or the VDR, those kinds of things. What are 4 or 5 big things that we should make sure we're doing?
So I think when it comes to dietary recommendations, depending on who you talk to, they'll be a proponent of a certain type of diet. But what I really try to do is personalize to the patient. And so some of the genetic testing that we started using, Maximize Genetics, there's a second part that's nutrition that'll tell you what kind of diet that you should be on based on your genetics. But there's also patient preference, right? And there's also your wallet, your budget, what you're going to be able to do. So I'm not going to say you have to be vegan, you have to be paleo, you have to avoid lectins, you have to do whatever. I'm just going to say I'm a proponent of the naked diet, which is not eating while you're naked, but it is eating food in its original form. So it means if you can hunt it, if you can kill it, or if you can pick it, then you can eat it, or if you can recognize the ingredients. So I am big, again, no processed food, as least amount of chemicals as you can. Now, certain people do have intolerances to certain types of food, so for them, they have to avoid gluten or dairy or something like that, but others might not have a problem at all. But again, a lot of gluten is pretty processed, so it's hard to find that original einkorn wheat. But so it really depends. I have some patients that drink that A2 milk, that they do fine with that. And so just eating food in its natural form is really important without all the preservatives and the additives and all the processing.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of I usually call it the real food diet. We need to have the food as it was made. And once we start altering it, then it becomes problematic. Our body's like, what is this we're putting into us? So that's usually what I also hit as well. And then some other things that I usually talk about are like the activity, making sure that we are active, but not overactive or underactive. Like we have GI issues that we're dealing with, or we have other chronic health conditions. Sometimes we can push that over into that fight or flight mode. There's a balancing point of providing, the energy and providing the body what it needs with the activity versus, okay, we're putting it over in the stressful state. So making sure that we're, again, listening to our body as to telling us, okay, is this too much for me? Like, don't go out and, do all this exercise just because I've got to make sure I do my exercise for today. When you get done with it and now you can't move and you feel terrible, that's, it's a little counterproductive. So we got to make sure we have a good activity plan. And then getting sleep. And it goes right back with the stress that we talked about earlier, is we have to have some downtime. And again, I like the car illustrations. And, if we have our car we don't leave it running in the garage overnight. Like the engine's going to burn out just sitting there idling. We have to make sure that we, when we sleep, it's also very intentional and there's a purpose behind that sleep so we can rejuvenate and really help to heal during our sleeping time. And then we need to look at removing toxins. I want to talk about what are some things that we can remove and avoid to help support any of our SNPs.
So getting on to more SNPs, some people have glutathione SNPs or they have detoxification SNPs. There's certain cytochrome SNPs that you might be more susceptible to charred food. So if you have that, those cytochromes are similar to the one that you can tell, like if you can drink coffee and it doesn't keep you up at night, you metabolize coffee very quickly. So my husband and one of my daughters can have it at 9 o'clock at night and it doesn't bother me. Me and my other daughter, we can't even have it past noon because it keeps us up. So we metabolize it very slowly. So just within our family, we do it differently. So basically, you did hit on two really important points about the exercise and the overtraining. And also one thing that I wanted to piggyback in there is the rest and digest. In full disclosure, I'm still really bad about this. I mean, eating while you're doing your work or you're reading or whatever, instead of giving your time you did mention to digest your food. So the other SNPs then that affect diet, so it depends on if you're somebody who's susceptible to those pesticides. So you might want to think about the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 as far as toxins. I mean, you could get really crazy. Like I've already transitioned cleaning products into non-toxic cleaning products. I've already transitioned makeup into pure makeup and not putting anything on your skin because your skin is your largest organ. So you think about this, like what you're putting on your skin. I mean, and organic hair dye as well. So I'm sorry, I'm too vain to have all white hair, which I would, and that was because of one of my SNPs too, because I found out my hair turned all white when I was 30, when I was pregnant because of stress, because you make a lot of hydrogen peroxide and you can't get rid of it. So it turns your hair white. So I found out reading Ben Lynch's book why that happened. But so environmental things are really important. What you put on your skin, suntan lotions, hair dye, what you eat, obviously organic and that kind of thing. And then I'm still having that fight with my husband as far as, do we have the dandelions in our yard? Do we use organic weed killer? Do we not? He wants to do Roundup and I'm like, no, don't do Roundup. So, you just have to, you could get a little crazy with all of this, right? So knowing if you have detoxification SNPs are helpful to know. And honestly, I think that's part of the reason why some people are affected by things like vaccines and some are not, because they have detoxification SNPs and they aren't able to get rid of some of the problems.
Right. That's another thing. The dandelions, like we can't get dandelions to grow enough at our house. Like I remember growing up, we had dandelions like everywhere and I did not appreciate them enough. We would eat them some, but I wish we had them now. Like now it's like, okay, why doesn't anybody get the dandelions to grow? We get a few here and it's like, okay, nobody picked them. Let them go to seed so we can have more. So I'll take all your dandelions. Send me your dandelions. So, how do we find out if we have any SNPs? What are some ways that we can find out, hey, you know what, I think I've got some different, did we talk about some of the symptoms? I don't think we talked about some of the symptoms. What are some symptoms that we may have some methylation issues or some other SNPs like in our neurotransmitter pathways? What are some of the symptoms of that?
So certainly, like I mentioned before, any teen that all of a sudden has really bad anxiety when a period starts, anyone in the GYN arena that is having any estrogen dominance pathology like fibroids, endometriosis, infertility, miscarriage, those are all things that make me think about MTHFR or COMT. Or if I have people that have a lot of intolerances to food or sulfites or things like that, like medications they take and they have a reaction, those are usually cytochrome SNPs. People who have headaches a lot of times could have an NOS SNP. Migraine headaches, or it could be a methylation issue as well. So those are the big ones: depression, anxiety, estrogen dominance issues. So most of those feeling brain fog and just not feeling your best a lot of times. And the funny thing is a lot of these SNPs we've had for a long time. So why is it that now, like I never had any issues with anything? Why all of a sudden, I mean, I did with estrogen, but why all of a sudden now in my 40s am I having these issues? Well, again, cortisol takes its toll and things progressively get worse. And even though now I'm much, much more healthier than I was 10 years ago. I'm eating healthier, I'm exercising better, smarter, and why am I having a worse problem with methylation? Well, because if you have these things, I think knowledge is power, and if you know that you have problems, then you choose to know. So I recently gifted my family with the 23andMe. Only one person's done it so far. That was my daughter. She just found out she was ApoE44. So I'm a ApoE34. So then she freaked, because then she also has methylation SNPs, and she gets anxiety. So she was freaked out about having ApoE44. So that's a marker for Alzheimer's disease. So I had to sit her down and tell her, and I'll tell the story about the agouti mice. I said, listen, just knowing you have the gene doesn't mean you're going to have it. So there were these researchers. Have you heard the story about agouti mice, Salena? Have you heard that?
Yes, okay. Yes. Please tell it. Yes.
So the agouti mice, they were in the lab, and they noticed that they were these brown mice, and all of a sudden they noticed that they had yellow fur and had, I think, diabetes and obesity and high blood pressure maybe. And so they knew that the color of the fur was not causing the problem. And so it must have been a gene that was linked with the fur color gene. So they started giving these mice methylation support in their chow, which is basically B vitamins. And what they noticed is that these yellow, fat, pregnant mice gave birth to brown mice. So that's an extremely powerful testimony as to how epigenetics, your diet, your lifestyle, everything is going to affect how those genes express. So to my daughter, I had to tell her, listen, you exercise, you turned your diet around, we're doing stress relief, you're doing all this, you're not going to get Alzheimer's, because the brain needs exercise, the brain needs glucose, stabilize the glucose, and we're going to have you take some fish oil and some choline, and you're not going to have to worry about that. So I had to tell her that story to make her feel better, because and the other daughter saying, I'm not doing that test now. I want to live my life freely. I don't want to worry about this. So it's just interesting how people react. So if you decide you are going to make a change, doing a test will be helpful to see, but you need to work with a knowledgeable provider, because if you just look at the SNPs, some of them may not be significant. And so you need to work with someone who's been trained on it. And reading Dr. Lynch's book will get you pretty far with it as well.
Yes, I always recommend his book. I love his book. I think it's a fantastic book. And it's a great starting point, and it gets, it helps to connect a lot of these dots and helps put things into context. That's one thing I usually always encourage people to put their symptoms and their lab results into context. We can't just, treat this lab result, whether it's a SNP or whether it's, some other lab. We've got to say, okay, where does this fit within the whole big picture? And the same goes with our genetics, no matter what it is. Like, we got our genetic test back recently, and it's exciting because it was able to help us to put some things that we had some suspicions about, and it helped us to fill in a lot of gaps. Like, my son has the BCMO1 gene, and he's got several SNPs. I think there's 5 of those, and I think he's homozygous in 1 and heterozygous, I think, in 3 others. And so he's got some problems with converting the beta carotene vitamin A conversion going on. And we have seen that with him he'll have this orange skin. We knew that it wasn't the bilirubin, it wasn't because of that. And it was like, okay, what's going on here? Well, now we kind of know more why that he will have that. And there's another gene, DAO, which we see a lot in autoimmunity, is leaky gut. So whenever I have clients that, okay, we're dealing with a lot of chronic GI issues, I'm very suspicious that, hey, is there a histamine issue going on? Do you have enough DAO? And so with my son, he was homozygous in all 3 DAO SNPs. There's another histamine-related SNP that he's heterozygous on, and then his tests actually come back and they confirm that he has no DAO. His histamine's crazy. We've been able to do a lot over the last couple of years with that, and we've improved it tremendously. But it was nice to kind of have the genetics on that to say, okay, yes, these things, he does have some problem areas here. So when I see a lot of these GI clients that it's like, okay, we can't figure some of these things out. Sometimes the genetics, getting that information can say, okay, this is a missing piece, but I can't reiterate enough. Make sure you're working with somebody who is knowledgeable to help you put them into context. Because I have other clients that, okay, they've got some DAO SNPs, but they don't have any problems. So there's no sense in us treating those things whenever their body is doing really well. So we've got to make sure that we always put these things in context. And so I think we hit on some different ways on how to find out we can get testing. I'm a big fan of Maximize Genetics. You can also get like 23andMe. And like Tara said, the book Dirty Genes. I really love that book, Dirty Genes. What are some other tests that we can do besides genetic tests?
Well, I want to qualify something that you said. So we started using Maximized Genetics as well, and we were previously using something called Alpha Genomics. And of course, the downside to some of these testing is the cost, right? So trying to find something that's, you know, a little bit more in somebody's budget. So now with 23andMe going direct to consumer, patients can get that on their own, but they have to know that when they get the report, they're not going to see exactly the printout what the SNPs are. They're going to see, this is your ancestry, this percentage is this. They're going to see you may be at risk for blood clots. You might like cilantro. You're likely to have this trait, that trait. It's not going to see MTHFR, heterozygote, homozygote. You have to take that raw data and send it to another platform, which again, you have to have an account. And so what we do if the patient has done the 23andMe is we download their raw data, and then we take that raw data and send it to Strategene, which is Ben Lynch's platform. That looks mostly at methylation genes. It doesn't look at the cytochromes. So then we also send it to mthfrsupport.com to get a full printout, but that platform doesn't designate the significant genes versus the non-significant. Just all of the SNPs are listed. But it is helpful. That's like a 60-page report. And so you have to know a little bit. So I ended up taking like a 6-week course with MTHFR support to know the data behind which ones are significant. So when 23andMe went, you know, direct to consumer, then they changed their chip, and they're not testing for all the same SNPs. They're not testing for MAOA and B anymore. And so there's some of them that are going to be kind of blank, and those I think are important. So that's why we switched over to Maximized Genetics. Now I know that there's some other labs like Genova Diagnostic that we use for a lot of our functional testing. They'll let you add on a few SNPs to other tests like your nutrition, your micronutrient testing, or your urine metabolite testing. You can add on for a small amount just MTHFR and COMT, or your VDRL, or your, or not your vitamin D SNP in your ApoA34. SNP, so you can add those on for a small cost to the cost of another test. But you have to make sure that you're using a good test, because I've actually seen a discrepancy between, so I've done so many different panels on myself. I've done 23andMe a long time ago. I did the Maximized Genetics, I did the Alpha Genomics, and I think there was somebody that recently came to me with another lifestyle genetic thing. I've seen discrepancies with what's reported. So you do have to make sure that you're using a reputable test too. So if someone's already done the 23andMe because they were interested in the ancestry, I will use that and send it to another platform. I mean, because, you know, you don't want to repeat anything. So, but if they haven't done a test, the Maximized Genetics has a very, 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 what's the word I'm looking for? It's very reasonably priced.
And comprehensive, yes.
Yes, for methylation, it tests about, I don't know, like 80 genes or something like that, or maybe. And then they're also doing another panel that we're on the list to be able to have access to as well. So for
yes, I'm excited. I can't wait for that one to come out. So that
be because I submitted a few requests for the genes that have to do with breast cancer, tamoxifen, and estrogen metabolism. I wanted those to be on theirs too. So, those are the, I know there was a place out in that Mark Hyman, there's a Biome, that's like Ubiome, they're doing it for gut genetics. And then there's a place out in San Diego that's doing whole gene sequences. Now, 23andMe is not your whole genome. It's just part of it. So, you have like something like 7 million genes, and I think 23andMe does 1 million of them. So but those are still costing like probably $3,000 to $5,000. So, and who knows what the significance is of all the rest of those things. So.
Right. That's a lot of genes that'd be a long report to go through. Like, oh my goodness, that would take forever. So awesome. So what are some other like stool testing, like the significance of stool testing or organic acid, which you often refer to as like the oat testing? Can those give us any kind of insights, like neurotransmitters and other things that are kind of going on biochemically if we had SNPs?
So the organic acid test is really great. I like to use the Genova NutriEval, so you're getting organic acid plus micronutrient testing at the same time. So I've kind of learned on that one. I haven't used the metametric, just the oat. And so basically there's certain markers, a pattern that you'll see with your neurotransmitter metabolites that can suggest that. So find that's helpful to look at your neurotransmitters, metabolites. You can get an idea about how the balance is in your body. And also some of the ways that your amino acids are going to be will favor SNPs of certain kinds. So that would also be helpful. I mean, you mentioned the SNP of DAO and the other one was HNMT. That's histamine problem is a huge issue with a lot of patients as well. So some of the other labs like whole body histamine, like a whole blood histamine might be helpful to see if you have that. But I think the organic acid test or the NutriEval is a really great place to start, because especially in the urine portion, they do have markers that can show if you have a bacterial dysbiosis or a yeast overgrowth. So that's the reason I really like that test, because you kind of get a screening of a lot of different areas just to start with.
What about like general labs? Do you do many general labs, like your B vitamin levels or your folate levels, homocysteine, those sort of things?
Well, generally, I do look at those things as well. I don't do B vitamins because those are extracellular. If you think about that, you're getting serum labs and you're spinning out the red blood cells and you're pouring off the watery serum, so you're not really getting what's intracellular. So I will sometimes order like an RBC magnesium or some of the nutrients like that. And I do obviously a CBC and the vital chemicals. But if I'm really wanting to know, I'll do the micronutrient testing, which is intracellular.
Fantastic. All righty. I wish for whatever reason, I can't see if there's any questions. If there's any questions, we will try to answer those once we get done here. And was there anything else that we didn't cover that we should have covered you think we need to touch on?
I just think the take-home messages is all this information is really helpful to help make diagnosis and help you guide your treatment. But the basics that you stress several times, I think, are what's important, is the diet, the lifestyle, the stress management. And no matter what your SNP are, knowing that you have epigenetics and that you can fix these things, not fix these things, but modify these things in some cases. I think that's I'm worried about the ensuing panic of patients when they, I witnessed that with my own daughter when they look at their genetic testing and then she thinks, oh my gosh, she got on the phone, called her friend, I'm going to get Alzheimer's, So I guess that's the biggest thing, is to put the brakes on that. And like you said, make sure that you're working with a practitioner that knows that as well.
Alrighty. I completely echo and ditto all that. And so I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank you, Tara, for taking your time to join us and share this amazing information with us. And if any of you guys are struggling or saying, hey, you know what, I've got some different symptoms, I'm just not sure how to put those in context, can you help me? Reach out to us. I'm going to leave a link below I do offer a complimentary discovery call where you can it's a 45-minute call where we can talk about what are some of your most challenging health problems that you're needing help with, and try to give you a few tips to help get you moving forward. So make sure you take advantage of that. And if you have any questions, let us know. You can post them or message us. And we look forward to seeing you. And I want to leave with one final thought, and that is to embrace your mother's instincts, that you've got this mama instinct that says, hey, I think there's something wrong. I think something's not quite right. Keep on searching until you find an answer. Don't give up, because there's answers out there. It may not be the genetics. It may not be, this lab or that lab, but keep on searching and embrace your mama's instincts. Our Creator gave those to us for a reason, and to embrace those. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow. And again, thanks again, Tara, for stopping by, and we will see you all later. Bye.